All right. The Gita, which we're going to get back to. This is the cover of the Gita. Just kind of notice in the cover, this is Krishna, the charioteer. Arjuna has the bow and arrow. And Krishna has blue skin. That will all come together in another lecture or two. So just something I'm calling your attention to. I also have a little friend here. I'll explain him in a moment too. This is a clay model, a clay little statue that Susan and I brought back from India back in 1971. We have treasured this ever since. It sits in an honored place. I'll explain him in a moment. Let's get back to our story. The Gita. Mel Gibson, cold feet. Krishna, his charioteer, giving him the pep talk. He wants to go home. He wants to go home. He doesn't want to fight. He'd rather give up the kingdom to his cousins than fight them. This is his initial instinct. So he doesn't want to fight. Krishna begins a series of teachings. This is one of the reasons why the Gita is so endeared to Hindus, and that is that in this story comes so many of the Hindu teachings, ideally made somewhat easier. So what is the first teaching? Arjuna's basic question is, Arjuna is asking, how do I get out of this? I just want to quit. And the first teaching that Krishna offers is the teaching we talked about in the last lecture, this teaching of Atman. I hope you know what it is. If you were here, I would ask you and make sure someone tells me that Atman is the soul, that essence inside of us. Atman, samsara. What is samsara? Another word from the last lecture, the concept of reincarnation. So now, to put this in some context, I find it kind of amusing, actually. In effect, Krishna's first argument to Arjuna is, Arjuna, it's an illusion. Nothing's happening here anyway. They're all coming back. He gives them the teaching of Atman. This is this life for them. They've got lessons to learn. They'll be coming back. I find this a really interesting justification for war. This is not, I think it's a reach. You don't have to bother. Don't worry about who you kill. They're going to come back. That's the teaching. That's the first teaching, in which he lays out, who are we really? We are this divine essence. And we're all caught in the cycle of birth and death. We're going to come back. The first teaching. Now, there are a series of other teachings. Arjuna wants to, in effect, drop out. He wants to renounce his kingdom. And so there is a discussion Krishna has with him on the topic of renunciation. Renunciation and liberation. So, here's the big question. Here's the argument. We learned karma theory in the last class. Combined with samsara, Life includes suffering. Life includes death, mistakes, teachings, lessons. Understand it this way, to put it in a context for you to understand. Since in the West we work with concepts like heaven and hell, in the East, this is the hell. This is what we're sentenced to. We're sentenced to come back. We're sentenced to suffer again. We're sentenced to learn our lessons until we get out. When we no longer have to come back to life, this is in effect when we realize our inherent divinity. When our droplet of the ocean returns to the ocean, that's the concept of heaven. The concept of blissful reunion with the divine. So the question becomes one of how do we get out of this? It almost feels like a trap. If every action sows the seeds for a future reaction, a consequence, how do we get out? It's like a squirrel running in a wheel. How do we get off the merry-go-round? How do we get out? This is the question Arjuna is answering for literally the rest of the Gita. The word for liberation in Sanskrit is moksha. Moksha. How do we achieve moksha? Moksha is one of the words. There are a few words in Sanskrit that you saw in the video that you did for this class that Gita made easy, as well as the video on the Upanishads. Moksha is one of those terms for, in effect, enlightenment. There are a number of terms in Sanskrit for enlightenment. Another term is samadhi. Samadhi, which is more a term for realization. Self-realization, realizing who we really are in the first place. Realizing our divine essence. Achieving samadhi. And there's another term, nirvana. Nirvana, I am going to reserve more for Buddhism. This tends to be the term that the Buddha will pick up, although it is found in the Gita, a word for, in effect, enlightenment. Not exactly what it means. I'll get into more details on nirvana when we get to Buddhism. Words for moksha, literally liberation. How do we achieve it? And what Arjuna is basically defaulting to is, here's a strategy. The strategy basically is, do nothing. If all action sows the seeds for future consequences, how about we do nothing? Let's try and do nothing. Let's not try and accumulate any future karma. Do nothing. Own nothing. Do nothing. Make yourself as invisible as possible. This is the path of renunciation. The word in Sanskrit is sanyas. Sanyas. Renunciation. A sannyasin We saw that grammatical move when you add the in. Brahmin became a person, in effect, a follower of Brahman, the part of the priestly caste. Vedantin, someone who followed Vedanta, the philosophy of the Vedas. A sannyasin is a renunciate. A renunciate. And here's the deal. It's a path. It's a path in India. It's a path you can see today. My little friend here is a sannyasin. That's why I brought, he is an illustration of a sannyasin. And you see men like this, almost men. I never saw a woman that looked like this. Minimal clothing. Notice the orange, slightly orange, yellow or orange. Really, they sit. They sit by the side of the road. Has some beads on. We'll talk about those. I wear some beads. They're called mala beads. We'll get to them in another when I have some time. He's he's got dreads. He's kind of a cool dude. He's got some ash, holy ash that he's got on his forehead and he puts on his arms because he spends part of the day in meditation and contemplation, just in devotion to the gods and goddesses. He's a renunciate. There's a begging bowl. He doesn't do anything to support himself. It's good karma for someone else to provide some food for him. It's just kind of taking advantage of the system, And Krishna has some interesting takes on this. Krishna is basically telling Arjuna, this is not your path. In fact, he kind of, I don't want to say he puts it down but what he really does is caution Arjuna that the path of a renunciate, that this issue of action in inaction or inaction in action, perhaps a little confusing in your homework. But what he's arguing is that for a renunciate, if you're trying to not accumulate karma, that in itself is a behavior that is basically accumulating karma. I'll give you a translation of that. Here's a Ram Dass translation. You've quit smoking, but you're obsessed with how you've quit. You are simply a non-smoking smoker. You're still obsessed with it, but you're not doing it. This is kind of Krishna's description of a renunciate that is missing the point. And he's worried that Arjuna, look, you can't just do nothing. This is not your path. He turns, and this is a teaching, the teaching of renunciation. Renunciation is a path if you can do it right. And this is what you see all over India. You see men outside the temples, sitting by the side of the road, begging bowls. They're not obnoxious. They're adorable. We think he's adorable. So the path of, this word, sanyas, is also a word used by a swami, another word you learned last week in the last lecture. Swami, an ordained Hindu priest. A swami has to take a vow of sanyas from the standpoint of that there is a level of renunciation. Swamis are not, they act. They don't drop out of action. But they do give up They don't marry. Sometimes it is even vows of Sanyas, tends to be translated into vows of celibacy. You give up desire, you give up possessions. Swamis take vows of sannyas. Now, just like we've had scandals in the Catholic Church, priests are supposed to take the same vows, and we've had some problems, and honestly, the Swamis have the same. Not perfect. Not perfect. I have a rule of thumb, by the way. If you're in a body, you're working on something. So be a little careful. Don't assume. So first teaching takes him into the second big teaching. The second big teaching is the teaching of Dharma. Dharma. Dharma in Sanskrit, in Hinduism, this is a big word. This is a big word in our studies. It will take on different meaning in Buddhism. You're not going to be able to get away from this word. Dharma in Hinduism, however, basically translates into duty. Duty. Krishna argues, Arjuna, you have dharma to fulfill. You have a duty to fulfill. Now, in your video, it talks about how his dharma is as a warrior. This gets back to that caste system. We learned the word Brahmin in the last lecture. Brahmins are members of the priestly caste. There is a warrior caste. In fact, from the warrior caste come the rulers. Rulers are not Brahmins. Brahmins run the temple system. Rulers run the governmental system. Rulers, for the most part, come from the warrior caste, the Kshatriya caste, not a word you need to know. There is a warrior caste, and basically Krishna is saying, Arjuna, you have a duty to fulfill. We all come here with a dharma, a duty. The duty. His duty is as a warrior. His duty is as a leader. His dharma is to bring prosperity to the kingdom. And the argument is that by winning, by defeating his cousins, the utilitarian argument, he will be a better ruler. The kingdom will prosper. He's doing this for the good of everyone. This is closer to a just war justification. The idea of fulfilling your dharma, doing what you came here to do. This concept will play into the caste system because to some level, your dharma is revealed by your birth circumstances. That sets up your dharma. This is one of the reasons you're here. Fulfill your dharma, and you have the possibility of getting out. But ignore your dharma, you're going to have to come back and do it again. The idea here, Krishna's teaching to Arjuna. And then he gives another teaching. The teaching is the teaching of yoga. Yoga. Now, yoga is a word that has also, it's a Sanskrit word. Good time. It's a Sanskrit word that you are becoming familiar with. We have yoga centers in all kinds of communities. So the word yoga probably has some connotation to you. We are familiar with it. And perhaps you only think of it as a group of physical exercises. But that is not what it means, and that is not what Krishna is talking about here. So, yoga, in the context of the Gita, what does it mean? If you go to a yoga class, you will have a yoga teacher that'll probably tell you that the word yoga means to unite. Comes from the word to yoke, to unite. And then they leave it at that. And trust me, when I went to yoga classes, I never understood what they were talking about either. So I don't relate to the word unite. And your video said it was said something to do with calming the fluctuations of your mind, and that is another definition. That actually comes from a book called the Yoga Sutras. Another challenging definition. I've worked with yoga for a long time. Been teaching it since we came back from India. It's virtually 50 years now. My definition of yoga, just like I gave you my definition of religion, the best translation I can think of for the word yoga is harmony. Harmony. The path to harmony. The power of harmony. Harmony in the body. We would define that as good health. Well-being, harmony in our minds, harmony between our bodies and our minds, harmony between who we are and who we'd like to be, harmony between who we are and who we think we are, and harmony. Harmony's the power here. So I'm about to give you a teaching, bonus teaching in this class. I think I'll take a moment and teach you how to levitate. Yes, you get to go to college and learn how to levitate. Levitate. Literally. I do a talk on this sometimes, and there'll be an 80-year-old in the front row, and I'll telling you, you can levitate. As soon as I teach you how, you'll be able to get your entire body off the ground with hardly any effort. How are we going to do that? You know, if you put your weight on a barbell and try and lift it over your head, a few of you, I'm sure, could do that, but not many. It's difficult. It's challenging. You're heavy. How are you going to lift the weight of your body against gravity off the ground with hardly any effort? This is the definition of levitation. Can you levitate? Now, personally, I think it's quite easy. It's easy, literally, to lift your entire. If you were here, I'd be looking at your cynical faces, and you would be wondering, what is this guy talking about, and where are we going now? This class is getting weirder by the moment. Hang in there with me. Levitate. Yes, it's possible. It's so easy, you're going to be incredibly disappointed when I tell you how easy it is. You've all done it. You've all had fun doing it. These are hints. Yes, you've levitated. Yes, you can levitate at just about any age. The weight of your body off the ground, how are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? Are you going to sit there? Be careful if I just kind of like, whoa, take off. This is not what I meant. I mean, up. Drum roll, please. This is my dramatic pause as I get ready to tell you how easy this is. It's as easy as sitting on a swing. Let that sink in for a moment. When you sit on a swing, the entire weight of your body goes off the planet with the gentlest of kicks. You do have to kick. And by the way, you have to know the secret to the kick. You have to kick at the right time. Kick at the wrong time, and you'll come back down to earth. But you kick at the right time. The entire weight of your body leaves this planet higher and higher on each cycle till the rope gives it, till the rope buckles, or you hit some other limit. There's actually a formula for it. The formula is going to infinity. For those that are mathematicians, it's because the denominator is going to zero. It's going up and up. It meets the definition of levitation. Getting the entire weight of... What is the secret? It's the power of harmony. The kicking at the right time, the timing. If you want to get your car out of a ditch, if you gun the gas, you're likely to dig a deeper ditch. But you get it rolling, forward and back. Some ditches you're not going to get out of, but if you want the chance to get out of a ditch, you're going to have to levitate that car. And you're going to do it with the harmonic of the forward and back. This is the secret when a singer breaks a glass, because the vibration of their voice harmonizes with the vibration of the molecules in the glass and they shatter. The power of harmony. It's the power here on this on this planet, in this life. There are teachings that visualization is the power. Book called The Secret. Not going to go there. It's got some truth. You need to be able to visualize where you want to go. It's not the secret. It's not where the power is. The power is in the harmony. Let me give you a teaching each and every one of you can use. Because you're at a point in your life, 19 years old, when I learned I was adopted. What are you going to do with your life? Some of you know already. Some of you understand your Dharma. You feel like you know why you're here, what you're supposed to be studying. And others of you are lost. You're not sure what major. You don't know what you want to do in this life. Here's a little bit of a formula. A formula. The secret to success. What do we need to harmonize? I'm going to ask you to look at 3 things. I'm going to ask you what you are good at. What are your abilities? What are you good at? We've all come into this life with certain capabilities, things we're good at. Maybe we're athletic, maybe we communicate well, maybe we're empathetic with others, maybe we're incredibly intelligent. Maybe we're good with numbers. Maybe we're good with music. What is it you're good at? Take stock in that. Be honest about it. Then take a look at what you like doing. I call it your passion. What is it you're passionate about? A translation of this is, when you lose track of time, what are you doing? What is it that you love doing? These two, by the way, may not be the same. You may love music, you may be good at music, but not like practicing. What do you love doing? And then, what do other people need? Needs of others. By the way, this is another word for the marketplace. Who's going to pay you? These three things, they connect. Can you put them together? Can you harmonize them? Can you take what you're good at and what you love doing and put it to work for others? When you get this swing to swing high, when you can levitate this swing, you'll never work another day in your life. You will love what you're doing. You might make a statement like, I would do it even if they didn't pay me. Well, you might not make that statement. A model of harmony. This is what elevates us. This is what Krishna is trying to explain to Arjuna. Find the harmony here. He offers 4 yogas. We tend to think of yoga. We think we know what yoga is. Krishna describes 4 of them. One of it, which you read about in chapter 5. He talks about, so let's go over here. I have some room. 4 yogas. The first, karma yoga. So now he takes that term you used for action, for behavior, and he puts it together with yoga. This is a word for harmonic behavior. When we can find our behavior, when we can tune our actions, he describes it as selflessly. When we no longer work for the fruits of our action, we don't work for the money, we work because we found the harmony in it. Sometimes this is translated as selfless service. In effect, reaching liberation by working for others. Not being obsessed, not driven by the ego. These are some of the things that your homework talked about. The video describing the teachings of the Gita. Not getting lost in the ego. Not being all about me. This is karma yoga. The yoga of selfless service. He also talks about, in these early 6 chapters, he talks about another yoga. You didn't see the name for it. The name is Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga. Jnana, it's got a J, starts with it. Jnana Yoga is the yoga of, it's utilizing your intellect. This is a word for intellect, it's a word for wisdom, it's a word for intelligence. This is the yoga, this is achieving harmony through the intellect. Intellectual harmony. What does that mean? That is this word over here, samadhi, for self-realization. Recognizing who you really are. The Atman. Realizing that beingness, that essence, that magic in each and every one of you. In effect, figuring it out. Who must I be? Understanding myself. Tapping into this magical inner being, the higher self. This is the yoga of Jnana. And in your reading, Arjuna even asks Krishna, which is the higher path? Which is the better path? Is the path of self-realization? This is the Jnana Yoga. Self-realization, or the path of selfless service? And Arjuna, and Krishna answers Arjuna by saying, actually, he votes the karma yoga. He votes the selfless service. Because he says, when you lose yourself in your service, you will realize that higher self. You'll find the beingness behind the behavior. You will, in effect, achieve both at the same time. As if to say, once you realize who you are, what are you going to do with it? This is Krishna's answer to Arjuna when he asks, which is higher. These are the primary teachings of the first 6 chapters. But we're not done there. We're not done there. There are 2 more yogas. The next yoga that he closes chapter 6 with and sets up, well, we've got a blackout for a moment. There, we're back on. if we don't move, the lights go out. All right. The word is bhakti. Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti is the word for devotion. Reaching harmony through devotion. Devotion to, in all honesty, a chosen god or goddess. We'll talk about how they play into these things. Krishna is potentially one of them. You may have seen on the street corners in New York, if you've been to New York City or you've been multiple major cities, you'll see some that they're called Hare Krishnas. Some students, usually younger people, not always, passing out free literature about Krishna. Passing out, dancing, chanting Krishna's name. The musical Hair. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Singing to Krishna. This is an example of bhakti. the next 6 chapters, Krishna is going to explain to Arjuna that you can basically reach harmony, tune into your chosen deity. In fact, this is when Krishna is going to reveal himself to Arjuna. Up until this point, Krishna is Arjuna's charioteer. He's coming across as a wise teacher. There's a big revelation in the Gita when Krishna reveals himself to Arjuna as God itself, God himself, as the divine, as an incarnation of the divine, as an object of devotion. The path of devotion. We will look at this in more detail in 2 lectures. When we start to look at the layout, the gods and goddesses, the qualities they represent, the cafeteria of choices of who and what quality to harmonize with. The teaching of Bhakti Yoga. It's considered a path. Model yourself. You could argue that devoting your life to Jesus is the path of a bhakti. And what's so interesting, you go to India, you go into a temple in India, you talk to a Swami and you say, well, but I'm Christian. A Swami will look at you and say, that's great. That's great. Deepen your relationship with Jesus. They're not making a distinction. We'll get to that, but the British had a problem with this, by the way. The British, the British thought, British missionaries thought, whoa, they should get these people away from their polytheism and enlighten them to Christianity. And it was very frustrating because basically the Hindus would say, oh, great. And then they would add Jesus into the temple. Just put up another one. It's not exactly what the missionaries had in mind. It's the model of a bhakti. We will talk more about it because, and I'll refer back later, but that walk through the Upanishads, when it talked about whether Atman and Brahman are identical, there are other teachings that point to gods are outside of us. We're not Brahman. We need to devote ourselves to forms of Brahman. And they can help us. And we're not exactly identical. And the path of bhakti is built on a slightly different model. We'll talk more about that in 2 lectures. Let's turn to the 4th yoga. The 4th yoga is called Raja Yoga. Raja is a word, I mentioned it before when we talked about the Mahabharata, and I used it as an example on Maharaja. Raja is the term for royal. This is the royal path to harmony. The royal path. The royal path is the path of meditation. These are the last 6 chapters of the Gita. Not just realizing the Atman, transcending, using the mind, calming the mind, finding those harmonics, transcending the intellect to realization itself. The royal path. On some level, this is the path that is being presented to you that has entered the United States. This path has 8 limbs. It's called the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga. Let me introduce you to them. So the teachings of Raja Yoga. I'm going to erase this part and tell you that Raja Yoga has 8 limbs, 8 steps to follow the path to realization, the path to samadhi. And it begins with the first 2. So these are called the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga. And this part of the lecture will put some of the yoga that you might be familiar with. I always love to ask a class how many have had a yoga class. Often, some of you have at least had a class or 2. Others may not be very familiar, but at least it's somewhat socially familiar. But you don't realize that it's not just exercise. It's an entire way of living, in effect. And it begins, the first limb is called the Yamas. The Yamas. The Yamas, Yama is a word for control. These are the controls. Control or restraints. So the first 2 steps of Raja Yoga are actually the ethical principles. The ethical principles behind Hinduism itself. And interestingly, there are 10 of them. We think of our ethical principles as the 10 Commandments. And what's so interesting, there's really, well, they're 500 to 1,000 years apart, an interesting issue between them, and that is that in the Yamas, and what are called the Yamas and Niyamas, the first 2 limbs, the Yamas are the don'ts. The Niyamas are going to be the do's. In the 10 Commandments, we the first 5 are just about all do's. Do honor the Lord thy God, honor the Sabbath, honor your father and your mother, have no other gods before him, don't take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. A couple of negatives, but for the most part, worship God, worship the Sabbath, observe the Sabbath, and honor your parents, the do's. Then you get to the don'ts. Don't kill, don't steal, don't. In Hinduism, there are 5 yamas. First one is ahimsa. We'll get into this more. Ahimsa is do no harm. Do no harm. Ahimsa, the very first ethical teaching in Hinduism. Ahimsa. Notice how general it is. In the 10 Commandments we have, thou shalt not kill. Some people will narrow it even further into thou shalt not murder, leaving open the possibility of killing, just wars and things like that. In the East, more general. Don't hurt anyone. Do no harm. This is the first ethical teaching. This will become the first ethical teaching in Buddhism. It will lead to vegetarianism. Don't even harm animals. This is a big teaching, and interestingly too, in the East, the order counts. So for example, the second teaching, I'm gonna go away from the Sanskrit terms because you don't really need to remember them. The second teaching is truthfulness, satya. There, I gave it to you in Sanskrit, but truthfulness. Not quite a don't. We think of these as the don'ts. The don't version would be don't lie. Truthfulness. Truthfulness. And when I say the order counts, for example, your roommate is having a bad hair day, it is not your responsibility to tell them if it's going to hurt them, hurt their feelings, or their self-esteem. When in doubt, go back to the first one. When in doubt, go back to the first one. Don't hurt anyone. Truthfulness, don't steal. I am going to leave off this. Don't steal. Don't take what's not yours. No stealing is the third yama. Don't steal. Pretty straightforward. I like to say, though, that if you want to take it more generally, it doesn't just mean stuff. Don't steal someone's happiness. Don't steal someone's self-esteem. Sometimes this teaching is taken into something like conspicuous consumption. Don't solicit other people's envy. Don't shove your success down their throats. Be kinder. That would be hurtful, to want someone else to be jealous of you. This actually plays into not stealing. The fourth teaching is, by the way, it's interesting. This A is, in Sanskrit, is a grammatical tool that we've taken into our language. We use it as a negation. For example, moral and amoral. Amoral, not moral, not having to do with morality. Atheist. An atheist is a non-believer in theism. This word happens to be asteya. It starts with an A. No stealing. The fourth term, the word is brahmacharya. It's basically the teaching of sexual morality. Although it's not exactly what it says. What it says is brahmacharya. Charya is a word for like chariot. It's a word to travel. It's a word to walk. Brahma is a word, Brahman, a word for the divine. You will learn that Brahma is the God of creation. To walk with God. To treat others as divine beings, not as objects of personal gratification. This is part of yoga. We don't use others. We don't take advantage of others. We treat them as if they were divine. When two people come together in sexual union, it is a union of divinity. This is how we should treat each other. It's taken into sexual morality, but it is basically walk with the divine, that Atman in each and every one of us. And finally, aparigraha, another A word, is don't covet. Don't covet. So it ends up relating to not stealing. Don't encourage someone to covet what you have. Don't be consumed by that desire to covet someone else's possessions or someone else's relationship or someone else's car or house. These are the 5 moral principles. 5 rules for behavior. The idea is follow them. Increase no karma. Don't accumulate karma by violating these. This is the first limb of yoga. The yamas, the second limb, the niyamas. The niyamas.